Everybody's afraid of something, and fear is the driving force behind all the panic shopping with the COVID-19 virus. We're going to talk about fear on this episode of the Driving with Rob podcast. There's a clothing line, an activewear line, and I think they also make energy drinks called No Fear. A fairly successful ad campaign where people had No Fear stickers on their car, wore No Fear t-shirts, and No Fear was just a company logo. But every time I saw it, it encouraged me and reminded me to not be afraid. Everybody's afraid of something. Nobody is completely fearless. You often think of fearlessness as associated with courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is going forward in spite of the fact that you're afraid. But I used to see this No Fear logo everywhere. And what it reminded me of was how many times in the Bible that God or one of the angels or Jesus was telling somebody, fear not, be not afraid. I did a podcast episode a couple of months ago called Looking for a Sign. Well, I took this No Fear logo as my sign that as a child of God, I needed to not be afraid. And fear, let me talk a little bit about fear. And not unlike the emotion of hate, it is counter to what human nature should be. Fear is not a positive emotion. Nobody ever gains anything by being afraid. Fear just makes you anxious and apprehensive and just makes you feel bad in general. And it robs people of their peace. It's very hard to be peaceful and contented and happy when you're afraid all the time. So we need to find coping mechanisms, something that we can keep in the front part of our brain that reminds us every day that we need to not be afraid. And for me, that No Fear logo really did work. And growing up Christian, growing up in a Baptist church, this No Fear logo reminded me of how often in the Bible people were told, fear not. And I was also struck by how often, in the midst of something that people should be afraid of, that God told them to fear not, be not afraid. In the very earliest stories in Genesis, after Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, God said, where are you? Why do you hide? Why are you afraid? So there's a very strong argument that can be made for the reason fear is such a negative emotion and so counter to a calm and peaceful mind is because it's a byproduct of sin. That when you did something that was against God, that was the first incident recorded in the Bible where man was actually afraid. Adam was actually afraid because he did something wrong. He was afraid of the consequences. Have you ever had one of your kids, or even a dog, or a cat, that hid from you because they had done something wrong and they knew it? If you have a dog in the house and it has an accident somewhere in the house, you not only have to clean it up, but usually you have to go find the dog. Because if he's house trained or is in the process of being house trained, he knows he did something wrong and he goes and hides. But I'm convinced that our Creator never intended for us to be afraid or to be anxious. Because it's repeated over and over in the Bible. Fear not, be not afraid. God told Noah, don't be afraid of what people say to you or about you. Build an ark. When they were inside the ark and the rains came, God said, be not afraid. When Moses saw the burning bush, God said, fear not. And when Joshua became the leader of the Israelites, and he was leading the armies into the land of Canaan, taking over one city after another, there's one story where the scouts came back and told Joshua, there's someone standing in the road blocking our path. Joshua said, who is it? And they're like, we don't know. But whoever it is dressed in white raiment, giving off light like the sun, and he's holding a flaming sword. And Joshua, being one of the most fearless, if not the most fearless person in the Bible, said, I'll handle this. And when Joshua approached this guy, who was gleaming like the sun and holding a flaming sword, he told Joshua, fear not, I am captain of the host, and I'm going with you. And that's God's message all through the Bible. Don't be afraid, have no fear, fear not, I'm going with you. And as Christians, as children of God, we need to remember that wherever we go, God goes with us. In the midst of the coronavirus, God goes with us. And that's why we are to have no fear. Just like the story of David and Goliath, the whole Israelite army was afraid of Goliath. David comes into the camp and says, why are you guys not attacking? And they're like, well, these are really big guys. And David said, we're the army of God. They're the ones that need to be afraid. And that's the hope that we have as Christians, as children of God, that no matter what we're going through, hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, no matter what it is, that God is there with us. And that's why we're able to say we have no fear. No matter how you characterize the fear, whether it's anxiety, anticipation, it's all the same. It all comes from a spirit of fear. And the biggest fear is fear of the unknown. And that's part of the coronavirus panic. We don't know what it's going to do. We don't know how many people are going to get sick. We don't know how long we're going to be quarantined. We're afraid of running out of supplies, running out of food, running out of water, running out of toilet paper. But it's the anxiousness or the fear of running out before it's over. It's the anxiety and anticipation of something that hasn't happened yet, which causes the greatest amount of fear. They say that one of the biggest fears that people have is public speaking. More people have a fear of public speaking than have a fear of death. So what you're saying is you would rather be the guy in the casket than the guy giving the eulogy. But as any public speaker can tell you, you always get nervous before you stand up to speak. But once you start, you very quickly realize that the dread and the fear you had was worse than what actually happened, was worse than actually doing it. Fear is such a negative emotion. It's so counter to everything we should be as human beings. We should be at peace. But too often, fear's holding us back. And if we can overcome that fear and go ahead and make that call, go ahead and take that first step, go ahead and ask that question you wanted to ask. Go ahead and stand up in front of that crowd and just start talking. Once we overcome that fear, then we can be at peace, we can be confident and comfortable and know that we're doing the right thing. But the first step is to overcome that fear. In all of this COVID-19 virus, this coronavirus panic, closing down the schools, closing down businesses, cities all over the world going on lockdown. Yeah, it's to prevent the spread of the virus, but what it really boils down to is that it's a response to the fear. In all this panic shopping and people hoarding and stockpiling supplies is out of fear, the fear that the basic essentials are going to run out and you're going to be left with nothing. But it's the fear that's driving it. All the stores are open. All the stores are saying that they're going to stay open. But people are still panic shopping and hoarding out of fear. And fear is just as contagious as a virus. Psychologists have done studies on the herd mentality. People will tend to do things they see other people doing. So that even when there's not a crisis, even when there's not a panic, if you see a crowd of people running in fear, you turn around and run too. Because fear is contagious, even when you don't know why you're running. So I really think a lot of this panic over the coronavirus is really just the natural human herd response. When you see other people panicking, you panic too. And probably the best thing that our leaders can do as leaders is to remain calm. Don't give people the impression that you're worried, because that causes them to worry. So if you're the type of person who wants to help and wants to do whatever they can during this crisis, the best thing you can do is to show other people that you're not afraid, that it's going to be okay. Stay strong, stay positive, encourage other people, and have no fear. And that's the episode for today. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you downloading. Thanks again for your support and your encouragement. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye now.